Fall is a busy time on the prairie of the northern plains. The harvest comes early, as does the frost. It's an invigorating time for a hardy group of people with a work ethic honed in a valley that is at times beautiful and fertile, and at times bleak and harsh. Fall is also a time for football, Bison football. It's a program synonymous with championship football. 8 national championships, 22 North Central Conference titles, 2 Harlan Hill Trophy winners, and the most successful playoff record in NCAA history. These are just the marquee accomplishments of a program that has become bigger than life to a university, community, state, and region. Football has become a way of life for the faithful. And what a way of life. Just as Green Bay has become Titletown, USA for the famed years under Vince Lombardi, North Dakota State has flourished under the guidance of some legendary figures. One of the greatest legends in all of college football had a hand in the early days of Bison football. Gilmore Dobie, the infamous Gloomy Gill, stalked the sidelines for 2 undefeated seasons just after the turn of the century en route to a spot in the National Football Hall of Fame. Years later, there appeared on the Bison scene an individual who would direct the herd for 13 years. Crisp, sunny autumn days were days for Bison football, and the term, "This is Finnegan weather," was coined for the immortal Casey. Needing a change in the early 1960s, NDSU attracted Darrell Mudra to the Bison scene, and a domination unlike any other in the history of college football was put in motion. In the first of 2 seasons under Mudra, the Bison went from 0-10 to 10-1 in a bowl victory. A year later, NDSU captured the first of its many national championships. Mudra had itchy feet and moved on, but his base of assistant coaches remained, and North Dakota native Ron Earhart stepped in. He guided the Bison to 2 more national championships, 3 consecutive undefeated seasons, and secured a spot as one of the most visible and nationally prominent sporting figures in North Dakota athletic history. The Bison stumbled only briefly after Earhart's departure for the National Football League. Then a Detroit native, transplanted to Texas, agreed to brave the cold fall winds on the prairie. Jim Wacker brought the Houston Beer offense to Fargo, and the Bison continued to win. After 2 NCAA semifinal appearances, Wacker turned the program over to a bright, young, energetic coach, Don Morton. Morton raised the program to new heights, guiding North Dakota State through the first half of the decade that totally belonged to the Bison. The herd appeared in the 1981 national title game, reached the semifinals in 1982, returned to the championship game in '83, and won it all, and came back in 1984 only to lose the championship on a 50-yard field goal at the gun. Not much changed after Morton moved on to Division I pastures. Defensive coordinator Earl Solomonson marched the Bison to the same national championship tune. The Bison won the title twice under Earl in 1985 and 1986. And the Bison were again in the market for a new head football coach. The search was short and the fit was right. Another defensive coordinator was elevated to the spot as Harvey, North Dakota native Rocky Hager was eager and able to advance the legacy. And so he did, winning national championships in 1988 and 1990. The coaching staffs, of course, were the key ingredient for the success of the herd. But the athletes on the playing field made it happen, and Bison football has been graced by a multitude of outstanding talents. At a time when NDAC was known as the Aggies, early names like Bert Haskins, Palmer Foss, and Edgar Olson are little remembered from an era that only whetted our appetites for the grid sport. The first Bison All-American halfback, Claude Miller, in 1926, set the stage for the more familiar heroes. All-American end Roman Myers starred in the early 1930s, while end Bud Marquardt and tackle Herb Peschel advanced from the plains of Fargo to stardom in the Canadian Football League. Another Bison halfback, Fritz Hansen, earned first-team All-American honors and earned a spot in the Canadian Football League Hall of Fame. The decade of the 30s ended with the departure of tackle Lyle Sturgeon to the Green Bay Packers and All-American halfback Ernie Wheeler to the Pittsburgh Steelers and Chicago Cardinals. All-American center Cliff Rothrock, football and war hero Dennis Drews, and the legendary prep coach Sid Cichy, quarterback Frank Esposito, and All-American fullback Kurt Quinnett were sparkling stars during a dim 20-year period that saw the Bison win only on rare occasions. But the big change was coming. Players like Ardell Wiegand, Lowell Lindemann, Gene Gebhardt, and Walt Odegaard pushed the Bison into the limelight in 1965. The famed backfield of Terry Hansen, Ken Rhoda, Vance Connor, and Mike Belmont in 65 evolved into the backfield of Bruce Masamke, Paul Hatchett, Joe Roller, and Tim Muse, a group that spearheaded the Bison national title teams of 1968 and 1969. Jim Fergie, Del Garrett, Ken Blasey, Bob Hyland, and Chuck Wall were also key members of that championship package. The Bison continued to develop giants on the field in the early 1970s, although the team's success waned slightly. Two-time All-American linebacker Steve Nelson went on to an All-Pro career with the New England Patriots, and All-American defensive end Jerry Dahl recorded a record 7 sacks in a single game. A Niagara of premier talent poured in the late 1970s, the 1980s, and the early 1990s, and success kept pace. Rick Buddy, Lou Curry, Mike Whetstone, Greg Hackford, Jim Dick, Tony Satter, Phil Hansen, and T.R. McDonald were among many who earned first-team All-American honors. Quarterbacks Jeff Bentram in 1986 and Chris Simdorn in 1990 capped record-setting careers as each won the Harlan Hill Trophy as the nation's best Division II player. Hansen, the pride of Oaks, North Dakota, is with the Buffalo Bills and played in his 3rd straight Super Bowl. Tyrone Braxton of the Denver Broncos and Stacy Robinson of the New York Giants appeared in a pair of Super Bowl games. North Dakota State University, a little place on the prairie and the state's land-grant institution, has its roots deep in the black earth of the plains. For over 100 years, NDSU has educated the region's people in how to manage this rich land and its accompanying resources. From its origins as simply the agricultural college, NDSU broadened its mission to include programs in business, engineering, education, and aeronautics. Its purpose, however, has remained as before, to help its graduates succeed in the world around them. It all began a century ago when biology professor H.L. Bali initiated communication with M.A. Brannan, a botanist at the University of North Dakota and the head coach of that school's fledgling team. Practice games were held at the AC and UND in 1891, 1892, and 1893, with students and faculty members mingling freely in the scrimmages. But although both professors were eager to get this newfangled game into action officially, it was no easy task. Money for equipment was scarce. Fans willing to pay for admission were scarcer. And many would-be players withdrew from action when they found the going too rough. A planned game in 1893 was declared no contest after the sudden withdrawal of one of the AC's ends, who quit the game in disgust after an afternoon of stiff arming, declaring that a game which would allow a fellow to be hit under the chin in such a manner without a fight is no game for gentlemen. And then came 1894 and the first big NDSU-UND game, which has since become labeled simply the game. According to Robert Reed, NDSU's first quarterback and team captain, there was no forward pass in the early days, and bucking the line was the main feature. Very little kicking was done. The ball usually was forced through the lines, and there was some running around the ends. Professor Bali developed a crisscross play which worked very well and served to confuse the other team. Reed went on to say the Bison were short of men when they went to Grand Forks for that first challenge, but so were they. They put in their military instructor, and we put in Dr. Heinebach, professor of veterinary science. Dean E.S. Keene wrote, when the team returned at 10:30 that night, the college bus, Green Maria, was there with a four-mule team. Some team, let me say. Shiny brass-mounted harness with ribbons on their heads and outriders in uniform. The driver looked like the Jack of Hearts, and everything was done like a military inspection. You'd have thought the president and his cabinet were arriving. 5 gallons of oysters in the Francis Hall pantry made the banquet. Everybody helped, and there was never a greater celebration. The year 1895 marked the withdrawal of the faculty members from the contest and the apparent introduction of the motto, win fairly, if possible, but win. Well, that's how it all began. No one had any idea the sport would capture the heart and soul of a region. After Bali handed over the reins following the 1899 season, several coaching giants helped guide the Aggies to 8 winning seasons in the first decade of the 1900s, including 4 undefeated campaigns. Jack Harrison took the Bison to an 8-1-1 and 7-0 seasons in 1900 and 1901. An innovator, Ed Shultz, took AC to a 4-0 mark in 1902 and a 5-1 mark in 1903. Shultz moved on to St. Louis University, where 3 seasons later he became the father of the forward pass. NDSU under Gil Dobie put together back-to-back undefeated seasons in 1906 and 1907. Nicknamed Gloomy Gil because of his pessimistic previews of upcoming games and his lack of praise for his players, Dobie's Bison years were the beginning of an 11-year period in which he coached NDSU and Washington to a 65-0-3 record. Dobie went on to one of the most successful coaching careers in the history of college football with the Huskies, Navy, Cornell, and Boston College, and earned induction into the National Football Foundation's College Football Hall of Fame in 1951. North Dakota State moved into the 1920s with a new alignment. NDAC became a charter member of the North Central Conference and won its first league title in 1925 under Ian Courtwright. Center Ravine Latimer became the first all-conference player for NDAC in 1922. But it was halfback Claudie Miller who became the first Bison to earn national recognition. Miller was such a popular figure that he was given the honorary name Chief Seize the Bear by the Sioux Indians. With the arrival of the immortal Casey Finnegan in 1929, the Bison expanded the scope of their football program. NDSU played the likes of such big-time teams as Wisconsin, Michigan State, Minnesota, Kansas State, Oklahoma City, Texas Tech, Army, and Northwestern during his tenure that included North Central Conference championships in 1932 and 1935. And it would be 30 years before NDSU won another conference crown. The Bison played the 1934 national champion Gophers of the University of Minnesota, and Bison tackle Herb Peschel blocked 2 kicks that were recovered for touchdowns to make NDAC the highest scoring opponent against the Gophers that season. Still, Minnesota posted a 52-12 victory. Things took a downturn after Finnegan retired following the 1940 season. 7 different coaches tried their hand at guiding the Bison with very little success. All but one had a losing record, and the exception was just a 5-4 mark in a single year, the period that lasted for more than 2 decades. One game that stood out was in 1946 during that bleak period. The Bison opened the season with Big Ten favorite Iowa. Head coach Stan Koska had assembled a group of war-tested veterans. All-Conference, All-American, and Bison Hall of Fame center Cliff "Boney" Rothrock remembers.
We returned home after the war was over. Stan Koska and assistant coach Chalky Reed set up our football schedule, and we scheduled Iowa. That year, Iowa was picked as the Big Ten champion. This had to be the biggest thrill for me as a Bison. We played Iowa to a standstill for 3 quarters, then ran out of gas with Iowa leading 6-0. The Big Ten favorite went on to defeat the Bison 39-0. Players like Jerry Mulready, Dennis Drews, Sid Sitchie, Bobby Hare, Charlie Bosch, Paul Moores, and Nick Solis caught the attention of the 1946 sport world by playing one of the most courageous games of any Bison team.
But moral victories were not enough for some. One man in particular, newly named University President Dr. Herb Albrecht, arrived on campus in the late fall of 1961 and thought they could do better.
My fondest memory of Bison football is the rapidity with which we emerged from the depths of the year 1962, when we sat through an 0-10 season, following a history of disastrous years which had developed a don't-give-a-damn syndrome among our alumni, students, and friends. That was our first season at NDSU, and along with the university's censure by the American Association of University Professors, served to establish a morale-shattering low that needed immediate first aid. We went to work on both issues, but elected to emphasize the athletic route first because it appeared to offer the quickest remedy and the more abundant visibility, at least locally.
From tiny Adams State College in Colorado, Darrell Mudra was the right man for the turnaround. Many others may have had more football knowledge, but he was brimming with confidence. He was a master organizer, and he had the ability to put together an unparalleled staff.
The first thing I did when I came to NDSU was hire Buck Nystrom. Buck thought that they made a mistake at Colorado by not hiring a local high school coach, so we decided to bring in Ron Earhart from Minot High School. Larry Weaver, who played for me at Adams State, also joined us, and Buck, who was a captain on one of Michigan State's Rose Bowl teams, shared that rich Michigan State heritage with us. He really became our mentor. Ron and Larry, who both went on to great careers in the NFL, owe a lot to Buck. I do believe, looking back, that we had an unusual commitment to the game. We didn't begin with a great knowledge of the game, but collectively we probably understood the game as well as any coaching staff in the country by the time we played Grambling.
The Bison went 3-5 in Mudra's first year, but the seeds for the amazing renaissance were planted. NDSU went 10-1 in 1964, snapped a 12-year drought against arch rival North Dakota with a 6-3 win, and won its first bowl game, the Mineral Water Bowl in Excelsior Springs, Missouri, over western state of Colorado, 14-13. The win over UND was especially gratifying. Before a packed house at Dakota Field, Rich Mishie's 3-yard touchdown run in the third quarter provided the margin of victory in a 6-3 thriller. The game was not decided until Bison linebacker Gene Gebhardt's picked off Sioux quarterback Corey Kohlhauer late in the game after UND had marched to the Bison 8-yard line. The game that put the Bison on the nation's football map came in December of 1965 when NDSU journeyed to Abilene, Texas for the Pecan Bowl. Undefeated and blessed with an outstanding defense, the Bison were, nevertheless, the underdogs to a much larger, much quicker, famed Grambling football squad. The conventional wisdom that was Grambling, with players like Frank Cornish, Willie Young, Henry Dyer, was sure to smother the outmanned herd. Amazingly, North Dakota State took the opening kickoff and marched 80 yards for the game's first score on Ken Rota's 3-yard run-off tackle. With his incredible confidence, Mudra exclaimed on the sideline, "We got him." And indeed they did. The Bison finished the day with a 20-7 victory. Outside of a 93-yard kickoff return for a score at the beginning of the second half, the herd allowed Grambling just 40 yards total offense and 1 first down in the second half. "We're on top of the world," proclaimed Mudra after the game, and they were. Both the Associated Press and the United Press International crowned the Bison the National College Division champions. And Mudra posted a framed notice in the football offices of the old field house. It read, "We haven't even scratched the surface." It proved to be a sign of things to come. Press International crowned the Bison the National College Division champions. And Mudra posted a framed notice in the football offices of the old field house. It read, "We haven't even scratched the surface." It proved to be a sign of things to come. The 7-year period from 1964 through 1970 was remarkable. The Bison charted a 67-4-1 record, winning the National Wire Service Championship 3 times in 1965, 1968, and 1969, and finishing second in 1970. The Bison were undefeated for 3.5 seasons, going 10-0 in 1968, 10-0 in 1969, and 9-0-1 in 1970, and winning the first 5 games of 1971 for a phenomenal 35-game unbeaten streak. The mantle of leadership fell to Earhart in 1966, and he guided the Bison through 7 glorious campaigns, including the national championships of 1968 and 1969 and the long undefeated streak. Earhart had a brilliant football mind and was a player's coach. He expected a lot out of a player, but he also was the type of coach that a player could talk to if he had a problem. His quarterback in 2 championship seasons, Bruce Krasamski, had great respect for Earhart.
I know what he did to us mentally. He just outcoached half the guys we played. I figured we were 7 to 10 points better before we got on the field.
Earhart's opening season started with 8 straight wins. The Bison were ranked first in the nation and traveled to Balboa Stadium in November to tangle with second-ranked San Diego State. Aztec head coach Don Coryell had a superb passer in Don Horn and wide receiver Haven Moses among his weapons and an assistant coach named John Madden. And the Aztecs had speed. Played before the largest crowd ever to watch a Bison game, 35,342, North Dakota State fell 36-0 to end the nation's longest winning streak at the time at 24 games. The Bison came back in 1967 to post a perfect 9-0 regular season record, including dicey wins over Nebraska-Omaha 41-33 and Northern Iowa 10-9 in the early part of the campaign, but sailed from there to a berth in the Pecan Bowl against Texas Arlington. However, a season of injuries caught up to the herd, and a perfect season went by the wayside in a 13-0 loss to the Texans on an ice-covered turf in Abilene in a game that attracted only 1,000 spectators. The whirl of the 1968, 1969, and 1970 seasons caught the state like a tornado. The Bison were the heavy favorite to win the North Central Conference, and they did not disappoint. NDSU was tested only once in 1968 as the Bison battled toe-to-toe with the Sioux in a 14-8 victory. Offensive guard Bob Hyland's recovery of a UND onside kick with a minute remaining sealed NDSU's fourth straight win over the Sioux, the longest Bison win streak in the series at that time. National title number 2 was wrapped up in the Pecan Bowl that season as the herd rolled to a 23-0 halftime lead over Arkansas State, and then went conservative in a 23-14 victory. Paul Hatchett, Joe Roller, and quarterback Bruce Prasamke each scored a touchdown as the junior-dominated offense spelled impending doom for the following season's opponents. With the healthy Tim Muse returning to the backfield mix in 1969, the Bison offense was potent. Only South Dakota State in the regular season finale held the herd to less than 3 touchdowns as NDSU rolled to another 9-0 mark, entering the herd's 5th bowl appearance in 6 seasons. This time, the scene shifted to the west as the Bison were paired with the University of Montana in the Camellia Bowl in Sacramento, California. It pitted the number 1 ranked Bison against the number 2 ranked Grizzlies, and it proved to be no match as the Bison pounded Montana 30-3. Prasamke, the slender signal caller who looked less like a quarterback than he did a soda fountain clerk, capped a stellar career with a 16-for-25 passing day for 206 yards and 1 touchdown. Prasamke, fragile-looking but tough as nails, directed the Bison to 20 victories in 20 starts over his career. But when that 69 team walked off the field for the last time, it ended the careers of some of the most famed players in Bison history. The slashing Muse earned 2 All-NCC honors at 1 halfback spot. The power-blocking Roller was a vital cog in an awesome offensive machine. And the darting Hatchet became the leading rusher in school history and was named first-team All-American by the Associated Press in both national title years. Split-end Chuck Wald became the leading receiver in school history. All told, 22 Lettermen from that unparalleled crew faded into Bison history. The 1970 club was not necessarily stripped bare. The defense was solid, headed by Kodak All-American strong safety Joe Sitchin. Only guard Dan Green returned on offense. But in Mike Benson, the Bison had a quarterback candidate who was destined to rewrite part of the record book. By the time Ryan Earhart got to his 5th year at North Dakota State in 1970, the Bison reputation had taken a stronghold coast to coast in college football. And this Bison football team opened at home in 1970 against Eastern Michigan. The 14-14 tie snapped a 20-game winning streak, but allowed the unbeaten line to continue for another season and a half. With Earhart's departure after the 1972 season, NDSU again tapped an assistant coach for the head job as Ed Shultz stepped in. He won conference titles in his first 2 seasons but missed the playoffs. And even before a 2-7 campaign in 1975 was completed, Shultz and his staff resigned under pressure. It turned out to be the only losing season in the last 29 years of the century. Unaccustomed to losing, the Bison sought out a young, dynamic, energetic coach from Texas. Jim Wacker had just completed a pair of national championship seasons with NAIA power Texas Lutheran College, and he had experience in the North Central Conference as an assistant at Augustana. The Bison went 10-3 in 1976 and 9-2-1 in 1977. Reaching the NCAA semifinals both years and hosting the first NCAA playoff game in school history. Wacker left in 1978, and it would be 3 years later, and a new head coach before the Bison would return to the NCAA playoffs. Don Morton, a bright, energetic, articulate man who was the backfield coach under Wacker, took over the program in 1979. After 3 straight 6-4 campaigns, the Bison opened the 1981 season with consecutive losses to Northern Michigan and Northern Arizona, and won a not-so-impressive 17-7 decision at Northern Colorado. At 1-2, the Bison faced #1 nationally ranked University of North Dakota at Dakota Field, and an entire program may have been hanging in the balance. After 3 quarters of stalemate, the Bison exploded for 24 fourth-quarter points and an impressive 31-7 win. The decade of excellence was underway. 10 straight wins put North Dakota State in the NCAA championship game for the first time in a storybook setting. Morton, the understudy, faced the teacher, the former boss, Jim Wacker, as the Bison and Southwest State squared off for the national championship. After a 14-13 standoff in the first half, the Texan speed prevailed, and Southwest had a 41-13 win. But that was not the end for the herd. It was only a beginning. In a decade that found the Thundering Herd winning more football games than any other program in America, NDSU won 4 national championships, appeared in 6 title games, made appearances in 8 championship fields, and had the period declared the decade of the Bison. A perfect 12-0 season in 1982 slipped away in the waning shafts of California lights on a late November afternoon in the semifinals at California Davis. A 4th down and goal pass attempt from the Aggies' 7-yard line fell off the fingertips of Bison receiver on the final play of the game, and perfection was ruined. But the message was there. The road to the national championship would now pass through Fargo. An outstanding defense greeted North Dakota State's foes in 1983, but the impetus to a national championship fell on the shoulders of 3 very green rookies. Quarterback Jeff Bentram and running backs Chad Stark and James Molstry, all true freshmen, stepped into the starting jobs at midseason, and the Bison clicked. The Bison won a share of the North Central Conference title and moved into the playoffs. A home victory over Towson State of Maryland may have been the toughest test along the way. California Davis provided a rematch for the Bison in the semifinals, but this trip to the West Coast turned out different as the Bison made play after play en route to a 26-17 win and a berth in a second national championship game in 3 seasons. High-powered Central State of Ohio met the Bison on the warm, sunny, but windy valley along the Rio Grande River of Texas. The Bison exploded with 21 first-quarter points and eased to its first-ever national playoff title, 41-21. The 1984 season appeared to be championship caliber when the Bison opened fall camp. But an early season loss to Mankato State and sloppy play in a 55-30 win over South Dakota State brought strong words from Morton for his team.
We scored 55 points and we can't get our first offense off the field. We are going to go back to work. Boy, we got a ways to go. That was discouraging. I was embarrassing. We got guys who don't even play a deep third. We can beat them third and long, and we're in a cover 3. Pass rush, non-existent. Hell, we're 5-1. That's the good news. And we'll get better. Lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way.
The Bison responded. NDSU won another North Central Conference championship and again faced California Davis in the national playoffs in what was becoming an intense rivalry. This time it was in Fargo on a most unusual 50-degree sunny day late in November, a Finnegan weather sort of day. The 2 Titans in Division II football battled to the wire before it was decided on the final play of the game. Bison disposed of league rival Nebraska-Omaha in the semis. Gulf South Conference foe Troy State met the herd for the national championship in another Palm Bowl. Guided by reserve quarterback Dale Hammerschmidt, the Bison marched down the field to take a 17-15 lead with 1:36 left in the contest. But as time ran out, a Troy State freshman booted a school record 50-yard field goal to take the hearts right out of a proud North Dakota State football team.
For 13 Saturdays, we just laid on the line in front of 12,000 people week after week after week and said, who is the best? And that's not going to detract from this game tonight is not going to detract from a great season. But the Bison will be back. We'll return. It'll happen again.
And indeed it would. But Morton would not be a part of it. His defensive coordinator, Earl Solomonson, a fatherly but intense man, took over the controls of the best football program in the land, but not without some turbulence. NDSU opened the 1985 season with a 2-2 record after a loss at South Dakota, but Solomonson was at his best.
This one is over. From here on, we got to move out, and we got to make it happen, all of us together. And I guarantee you, you take a look around, you reach up and you care for your teammates, and we can come back together, and we can make an awful lot of good things happen. I love you, man. And that love does not depend upon the score. But I'm also going to drive you. And I'm going to make it happen. We're going to push. We're going to work harder than we've ever worked. We're going to get ourselves ready to prepare to play a much better football game. But now we are tested. Now we find out just how tough we are.
The Bison came back with 6 wins and a tie in the final 7 games to win the North Central Conference Championship.
Last Tuesday, the Bison coaching staff told the players to put their equipment away and go home. The season was over. Well, then Sunday they find out that they moved from 18 to 7 in the latest Division II poll. That got them into the playoffs. That also sent assistant coaches scrambling, trying to find players to put a football program back together.
He's right there. What's happening, Mike? We're in the playoffs. Get her cranked up and get your tail up here.
With new life, the Bison were again to meet #1 ranked California Davis on the West Coast. Regathered and recommitted, the Bison stunned the Division II nation with a 31-12 domination of the Aggies. A rematch was set in the semis with South Dakota, and the Bison were ready. Defense was the key on this day, but the most spectacular offensive play in Bison lore burned its way into Herd history. Bentram on the option, cuts it up at the 35, and he kicks it back. There goes James Bullstring. Bullstring's going to go all the way. What a big time play. The play was to ignite the Herd and send them to a 3rd straight title game and 4th in the past 5 years. Another Gulf South team appeared in Texas as North Alabama was set to challenge the Bison. It was no contest from the start. North Dakota State rolled to a 35-7 victory and its 2nd playoff championship and 5th national title overall. Not bad for a team that was unloved, unwanted, and unranked by the national committee entering the final 2 weeks of the season. Was unloved, unwanted, and unranked by the national committee entering the final 2 weeks of the season. The 1986 season was different. Wire to wire, the Bison were considered the best team in the nation. Before it was over, North Dakota State may have pronounced itself as the best grid team ever to appear on the Division II scene. The Bison averaged 41 points to just 7 for opponents in a 13-0 season that saw the Herd challenged only once during the regular season by South Dakota in a 21-12 win. The young Bison Stars of 1983 had matured into the best backfield in school history, and the surrounding cast was virtually flawless. 7 players earned All-American mention of some sort that season. Quarterback Jeff Bentram set several national scoring records, breaking Walter Payton's Division II record for rushing touchdowns and becoming the first player in NCAA history, all divisions, to win 3 national scoring championships. It happened on a day in Grand Forks when Bentram scored his 62nd touchdown against the Sioux. An outmatched Ashland of Ohio was crushed 50-0 in the opening round of the playoffs. Central State of Ohio came to town for the semifinals and taunted the Bison players and fans with raised helmets prior to the contest. When it was over, Central State coach Billy Joe acknowledged that the Bison could have named the score in a 35-12 win. The Bison, he said, have a program that's on the same level as a Division I-A team. We played about as well as the Bison allowed us. And North Dakota State was on its way to its 4th straight title game appearance. It would be against league rival South Dakota, but the scene would shift from Texas to Alabama before a national television audience. On Thursday, prior to the championship game, Bison quarterback Jeff Bentram was named the first recipient of the Harlan Hill Trophy as the nation's best player.
When I first heard about the award, I thought it was a great thing for Division II, since we don't get as much recognition as Division I programs. I thought that was very nice, but personally I didn't think I had a chance, because there's a lot of great athletes around the country, including Johnny Bailey and Jeff Fustel. I want to congratulate them for being one of the finalists here, and congratulate them on a great season. Most importantly, I really want to thank and congratulate my teammates for the support they've given me throughout the years, not only this year, but the last 4 years. I know that all my personal accomplishments couldn't happen without their hard work and dedication and support, and I love you guys. Thank you.
On Saturday, Bentram proved why he was the premier player in the country. He ran for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns and directed an offense that piled up 360 yards. Future NFL star Tyrone Braxton put the capper on the day with an 84-yard punt return for a touchdown in the third quarter, and the Bison were champions for the third time in 4 years with a 27-7 victory. Again, it was time for a change. And again, the Bison seemed to hardly notice. Rocky Hager was elevated to the head job in 1987, and the Bison were back in the national limelight in 1988. Offense was the hallmark of an 88 team that would become the first team in school history to win 14 games. NDSU scored no fewer than 4 touchdowns in a game, only twice, and averaged 40 points per game as the Herd swept through another undefeated NCC campaign. The Bison demolished league rival Augustana in the opening round of the playoffs, but struggled with Eastern foe Millersville, Pennsylvania, before rallying from a 26-14 deficit in the final quarter. With sophomore quarterback Chris Simdorn scoring 3 fourth-quarter touchdowns, the Bison rallied for a 36-26 victory. The backfield trio of Tony Satter, Doug Lloyd, and Chris Simdorn had a field day the following week in the semifinals, each running for over 100 yards as NDSU belted California State Sacramento 42-20 before a near-capacity crowd at Dakota Field. It was back to Alabama for the Herd and the NCAA title game. This time, Portland State and Coach Pokey Allen would provide the competition. Unaware of the Bison tradition and strength, Allen claimed that NDSU had won its way into the championship game through a much weaker bracket. The Bison made the Vikings eat those words. Sophomore running back Tony Satter stole the show with his spectacular running that included 2 outstanding touchdown runs. The Bison offensive line was magnificent as it controlled the line in the second half, and NDSU scored an impressive 35-21 win. The victory was the 4th national title win in the 1980s under the playoff format, branding the time span as the decade of the Bison in Division II football. Despite numerous injuries, the Bison appeared in another national playoff field in 1989, bowing out in the quarterfinals. But it set the stage for another memorable season to come. The 1990 season was ready to challenge the 1986 for excellence. The Bison had a veteran team on both sides of the football. The offense would prove to be unstoppable behind the backfield of Chris Simdorn, Tony Satter, and Marty C., to the tune of 39 points per game. Satter was the most devastating open field runner ever to grace Division II football, while C was the complement inside. Simdorn was destined to become the greatest rushing quarterback in Division II history, and only the third quarterback in the history of the game to run for over 3,000 career yards. The Bison defense would be spectacular with All-American tackle Phil Hansen anchoring the unit. With a 10-0 regular season run and wins over Northern Colorado and Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in the opening rounds of the playoffs, NDSU played one of the most memorable games ever staged at Dakota Field. A talented Pittsburgh State team, the Bison, marched up and down the field in a game that saw the lead change hands 7 times in this semifinal classic. Tony Satter and Marty C. scored fourth-quarter touchdowns, and the Bison defense picked off 2 passes in the final 4 minutes as the Bison scored a hair-raising 39-29 win. The Bison again were off to Alabama in a rematch of the season opener against Indiana University of Pennsylvania. The Bison won that first game 28-18 in Fargo, but Simdorn had sat out that contest. The Indians were to find out why Simdorn was the best player in the nation. On the eve of the championship game, Simdorn became the second Bison in 5 years to be named winner of the Harlan Hill Trophy.
One thing my father told me, he said, surround yourself with great people and you have a good chance of being successful. And that's what I feel I've done at North Dakota State. And I have my teammates to thank. They made this all possible. And they're in the back of the room, and I appreciate all you guys for being here. This is your award just as much as it is mine. Thank you, and I love you. Thank you.
Simdorn ran for 145 yards and 2 touchdowns and passed for 179 yards and 3 scores as the Bison exploded for 30 third-quarter points in a 51-11 rout. Satter ran for 174 yards, including a long 66-yard score, and the Bison defense, spearheaded by linebacker Todd Wash's 6 quarterback sacks and Hansen's 4, NDSU totaled 10 sacks. It was the 8th national title for the Herd and the 5th in the last 8 years as the unparalleled Bison success continued. The Bison closed out the first century of football history with appearances in both the 1991 and 1992 NCAA playoffs. The Bison fell 38-37 in the 1992 quarterfinals at Pittsburgh State in Kansas when another memorable game was decided in overtime as the Bison attempt for a win on a 2-point conversion fell an inch short. As one tradition passed on, another was begun. Dakota Field, the home for the Bison at 2 different campus sites over 54 years, gave way to the Fargo Dome, a 19,000-seat dome facility as the 1993 season dawned. The ghosts of Finnegan, Earhart, Mudra, Morton, Fergie, Bentram, Simdorn, Satter remain at Dakota Field. The echoes of the past have dimmed to memories in the wood and brick structure that served the Bison so well over so many decades. Those memories are part of a tradition that continues to live and to thrive.